much like the Obama agreed to be different than its predecessor. And, as we often see, when it comes to folks on either side of the aisle, obviously we understand that Republicans are very blatant and upfront about, their xenophobic, anti-Black views when it comes to immigration and asylum law and policy, right? There's no hiding that. But with Democrats, in the spaces that I've been in, even folks that you think are allies, it's a lot to do with political will and midterms, and they personally understand the importance of advocating for migrants and those that are less fortunate per se, but they also understand that they're dealing with a lot of generations worth of misinformation and racism around the way that immigration policy has historically operated in the United States. So and the fact that they're operating against a fundamentally broken immigration and asylum system, and a lot of folks don't really have the political will to come up against that system. And also, being a Black American, speaking to my own experience, talking to Black lawmakers that maybe are not familiar with the immigrant experience, due to how immigration is normally framed in mass media, has been historically framed as a Latinx issue. So, when you have Black American lawmakers that have a ton of things on their policy priorities list related to the Black community, Black immigrants, again, are dealing with that double oppression where in mainstream immigration spaces, they're dealing with, anti-Blackness and not having their unique challenges represented in the bigger immigration landscape. But then also, as Black immigrants, they aren't always properly advocated for in Black civil rights and human rights spaces as well. So I think that was also the important part about this report, to show that irregardless of what your legal status is in this country, due to how the laws are set up, you're criminalized for your Blackness, irregardless of your legal status. So, all of this, divide and conquer between different Black populations and communities in the United States is really kind of, moot point, and it's something that's used by the dominant society to keep folks divided, to keep us, not being united against what the common goal should be. You know what I mean?
That's really an important point. There's several important points that both of you brought up, specifically around the disparity in terms of how Black immigrants are treated, especially coming from places where there are conflicts happening. Those of us who can recall last year with the crisis at the southern border of the US and Texas, and also can recall what happened in Haiti last year with the hurricane. There was political strife, the assassination of the president, and all kinds of conflict that you would imagine would warrant asylum, or would warrant the kind of treatment that we saw rolled out essentially for the Ukraine after the Russia-Ukraine war began. So just calling attention to the disparity in terms of how immigrants as people are portrayed, and the level of empathy that is extended or not extended, specifically when they are Black and coming from predominantly Black countries, is a really important point to lift up. Also, to the points that Sharon brought up, and Tamantha, that you also spoke to, is this notion of that all Black people have been harmed by this system, by the criminal legal system and by the immigration system. And I just wanted to emphasize this notion that we have to actually care, right? So even when we come, for those who come to the United States, that we can't afford to sort of turn a blind eye or to just not be aware of the injustices that Black Americans face, because we also are affected by those as well. And so I think it speaks to the point of why we have to align ourselves with each other against a common foe, or a common enemy, if you will, so that we can have that strength in numbers and that strength in our unity and in our coming together. So I really appreciate you bringing up those points into the space. And as we talk about what criminalization looks like, I would love for either Rose or Sharon, if you can talk a little bit more about, from the standpoint of refugees, what does a system, an immigration system that criminalizes Blackness look like for refugees who are coming here? Both of you have really worked in that space. space. And I think helping to shed light on that particular dynamic of this issue would be helpful.
Sharon, are you going first? Yeah, when it comes to that, it's like, when it comes to the system of immigration, talk about refugees, like being Black, racism still exists. Like being Black people are always on the bottom, you know, when it comes to refugee. Like when it comes to treating them, color plays a big role in that. Like you're coming in as a refugee, this is a new home for you, coming in with all the excitement, thinking like, I left my home where there's war and fear, all this. Now I'm here. This is my new home. Yet you're facing discrimination. The treatment is not fair. Black people are being given they're being put in different places, like housing system, like poor neighborhood. Their children are being put to schools that are lowly funded. And when it comes to the settlement agencies, even the way they're treating Black people versus other like Asians or Ukrainian, Afghans, or any other like Iraqians, you know, Bosnians, is so different. You know, even the caseworkers themselves, they can attest. And we hear a lot as an organizer, we hear a lot of complaint that, oh, we don't receive help when we call in, when we need help finding jobs. Like even just providing a proper training, like, okay, you're going to live in this country for as long as you're going to be here. So you're going to be with us for 3 or 6 months. Those are the training that we have to provide for you in order for you to fit into the system of the United States, like checking buses or dropping kids to school, how to interact with police, how to interact with your supervisors, when to go to work on time, doctor's appointments, having buying a car or buying a home, paying rent, those simple necessities. Those trainings are not provided fully. So people from outside, like refugees themselves, like pastors or imams, they can step in to help the people in the state of the case workers stepping in, doing their job. You can see discrimination is still happening within. Even their children, the way they're being treated is totally and completely different. So Black people are struggling, be it immigrants or refugees and anywhere else, they're still facing that. And it's the day-to-day struggle.
Sharon.
Yeah, just to add to what my colleague Rose said, actually, and I'm really thankful to Rona and Tamanta for actually buttressing on those issues that they talked about earlier. And we don't see any difference in Louisiana's. And recently, we know we had the elections, and Louisiana actually, among 4 other states like Vermont, Tennessee, Alabama, and so on, is the only state that still voted, and refused to struck down an amendment to its constitution that would have prohibited slavery and involuntary servitude. Now, we get to see that that is still going on. Why? This can be prevented, but most times our communities are not probably educated about what is even in the ballots. So that is, first of all, a challenge. And also in Louisiana, we get to see that we have 3 parishes. We still have the 287G agreement, which allows for police to do the work of ICE. And also, we can go back to history. In 2018, report shows that ICE actually, their arrest has tripled till date. We also see the Southern Poverty Law Center also founded evidence about the law enforcement disproportionately targeting Blacks and Latin communities. We also see a high alarm of jail rates, and mostly 75% of those individuals who are victimized are the Black folks. Now, we also see there was also a report from the Promise of Justice Initiative that found that there was even majority of death that could be prevented. And most of those who were victimized were actually Black folks. Now, this goes on and on and on. And we also see the discrimination, just as Ronan mentioned and Tamanta, in the borders, where Blacks are being discriminated to enter the bus systems. And we also see that the Ukrainian immigrants are treated better than the Black folks. Now, this goes on. It doesn't just affect the Black folks, but it also is affecting the immigrant community in a very high rate. And the refugees are not left out. They are being thrown in jail. They don't have proper representation. These are things that we see in our communities, lack of proper representation. And Title 42, just as my colleagues mentioned, are also some of those things that are not also helping the immigrant community. Thank you.
Can we, for the audience who may not be familiar with Title 42, can you explain what it is and why it's important in this discussion?
So, and Ronald, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to sum it up, basically it was piece of legislation passed during the Trump administration's time where they were saying that they would prefer folks that were trying to enter the United States through Mexico to stay in Mexico and apply for asylum there instead of trying to enter into the US. And they were using the COVID pandemic as their reasoning. They were saying, you know, this presents a possible major public health risk to the United States to bring folks in this way. So keep them over there to file for asylum. We'll make sure they get properly tested, so on and so forth before they come over. But even as recently as a few weeks ago, from what I've been reading, you know, with the Biden administration keeping the Title 42, well, they did try to get rid of it, but I know that there's some things going on in the court where they're trying to block Title 42 from ending, and there's a lot of Republican pushback and a little bit of Democratic pushback to Title 42 ending, actually, because there's a lot of fear mongering going on around there being, you know, a surge if we let Title 42 go, that will happen. But Haitians, especially like Black immigrants that are trying to come in, they're not being tested for COVID. They're not, you know, I mean, all of the reasoning that they're giving for Title 42 and the, you know, the health reasons, while in America, people are getting upset with having to wear a mask and they're saying that's an infringement of their rights and how the pandemic is over. But then at the same time, when it comes to Black immigrants trying to come over, you know, you can't have it both ways. They're still trying to argue that there's some kind of pandemic issue, Republicans especially, but it's like at the same time, you're the same folks that are advocating in your own states and municipalities for the fact that our government is treating us like, you know, substandard citizens because they're making us have mask mandates and so on and so forth, and that the pandemic isn't an issue. So obviously that makes it clear that this Title 42 is just being used as an excuse to block out a certain group of folks. And then Ronald had brought up, and a couple other folks brought up, the fact that there's very clear desperate treatment between Black migrants versus white migrants. You know, with the Ukrainians, they're coming through Mexico, they're allowed to come through. There's not any kind of argument for, you know, Title 42 to be placed upon them, because again, we're giving them compassion in their time of need, as all people that are fleeing from war-torn countries, from countries that are in economic, social, and political upheaval, should have the right, the legal right, according to, you know, international law as well, to be able to seek asylum and be treated with humanity. And as we saw from the film footage that came out last year at Del Rio, and how Haitian migrants were being treated, you know, much like film footage in recent years of Black Americans encountering police brutality. We know that it didn't just appear because cameras appeared, right? We're finally putting a lens on, you know, what has been happening for decades, probably at that very border. So it's essentially, it's just a piece of legislation that's just continuing the decades, centuries long xenophobic origins of the American immigration system, essentially.
Thank you so much for that. Ron, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just, you know, just a couple of pieces, and, you know, thank you, Samantha, for making that. I think that was, you know, a great overview of what Title 42 is. But I did want to clarify one point, is that it's not anything that has been passed. This has not gone through Congress. This was enacted by Trump because it was an old health policy that was in the books. And they took advantage of being able to implement it because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We now know that it had, well, it's not that we now know, we knew back then that it wasn't going to mitigate the harms of COVID-19 or stop the spread. And it was just another tool that the Trump administration had used in order to impede migrants from coming, you know, and seeking asylum, which is their international law and their human right. And, you know, secondly, I wanted to also just add the fact that, yes, we have seen a lot of the the Haitian migrants and how they've been impacted by Title 42, but I'd be remiss if I did not add that all Black migrants are being impacted by Title 42. I couldn't tell you, Baji had done a trip to Tapachula in the border. We met with Angolans, Cameroonians, Ethiopians, just to show you the depth of this situation and how it's impacting, and it's intentional, right? As we've seen in recent months, there's a whole new other line for white Ukrainians, right? The whole process is not the same. So it's like we have this Title 42 that's been implemented because it's going to stop the spread of COVID-19, and we've realized from scientific evidence that it does not stop the spread. It has been continued, and I think the last point about all of this, and I think Samantha was saying it as well, is just that in particular, I think the point right now is the fact that this was implemented by the Trump administration, and before the election and during the campaign season, the campaign of President Biden was saying that they would end it. We are 2 years into his administration. Title 42 is still in the works. I know there's recent news now that it's supposed to be ended in a couple of weeks. I can't recall the exact date right now. Please excuse me, but that is to show that 2 years after we've been promised that it would be brought to an end, it has not. And the reason it has not is that it's because it's a racist policy that works. It keeps Black people from seeking asylum. And again, it's the United States cheating their international responsibility and the law. I think that's the other thing. Yes, it is Black folks' human right to seek refuge, to seek asylum, whatever it may be, but it is also the international law. It is law. This is in the books, and the United States is cheating it each time, Title 42 is allowed to see the light of day. So, I hope that's just giving a framework, because it's very important to note that this is not a policy that has been passed through Congress. This has not been vetted. This is something that is executive, and in the same way that it was implemented, it could be ended today. And because the fact that it works, it keeps Black people out of this country. That is why it's still here, and that's why we're still advocating against it. And so, just wanted to add that point. But I think Samantha covered in general the theme of what it's about and what's happening.
That's a really important point and really important additional context. And I think we also have to have in the back of our minds this broader phenomena that is happening across the country about concerns about the Black population, the white population, demographic shifts. We have seen, in addition to just the criminalization that we're talking about right now, but we've also seen these efforts to curtail protest. We've seen these efforts to inhibit the access to the vote. We've seen these efforts to prohibit the teaching of accurate history in schools. It's important that we don't take all of these issues as separate and discrete issues, but they are collectively in response to demographic shifts to Black people. And so the intentionality has to be lifted up. The fact that there's a confluence of these policies, some that are through the administration, some that are through Congress, but collectively they have been harmful. And so with that in our minds, I want to sort of go back to the 1994 crime bill, because this is where you find just so much of what has been harmful to Black communities, even before the immigration discussion was on the radar. And I want to just call attention to some of the harms that we've seen, that Black communities have experienced, that have led to some of the issues that we're seeing now, whether it's in the economic disparity, whether it is in the mass incarceration, the school to prison pipeline, the racial wealth gap, which is popularized now. A lot of that can be traced to these sorts of policies that were implemented. And it's important to note, because I think someone brought this up in the chat discussion, nonpartisan, meaning in either whether it was a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, a Democrat's administration, we've seen these harmful policies proliferate. So just on the 94 crime bill, we've seen this massive spending on prisons, authorizing nearly $10 billion in subsidies to expand state prisons, We've seen them implement the 3 strikes rule, which is mandatory life imprisonment without parole for committing violent felony. We've seen 13-year-olds were able to be tried as adults. They created 60 new death penalty offenses under this crime bill. We saw enhanced penalties for drug-related offenses, and we know that the war on drugs was really a war on Black people. We know the impact of policing and mass incarceration on Black communities. We know that they have increased so much spending in establishing the what was called the COPS program, the community-oriented policing service, hiring 100,000 more police. These are all things that came out of the 94 crime bill, and some of that has been echoed in the most recent crime legislation or safety, quote, legislation under the Biden administration. And so just really seeing the after effects of that, even before immigration was more so on people's radar, it just underscores why we have to care about these issues, why we cannot exclude anyone in the Black community, because we are seeing a coordinated system of laws and policies that are designed to be harmful to Black people wherever we are. And so just laying some of that out, if we can talk about some of the parallels on the immigration side, just so that listeners will have that comprehensive picture of how the 94 crime bill and its antecedents, and now the 96 immigration bill and what we're seeing today, helping us to connect those dots.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I think you did a really great job overview of, the 94 crime bill and, how it's been detrimental to Black Americans. But I mean, you can really transfer that to the Black immigrant experience, but, kind of is amplified, right? Because I think as Sharon had mentioned, and due to 94 crime bill and the passage of the 96 Immigration Enforcement Act, you see, immigration be criminalized in a way that it wasn't before, right? It used to just be something that was dealt with in the civil courts. It wasn't something that was seen to be a criminal offense. So you see this funding going to local jails and prisons, and these partnerships between, federal immigration enforcement agencies and local jails and prisons and states coordinating together in a way that was not happening before. And obviously that's going to tend to affect folks that are already disproportionately in communities that are already over policed, which tend to be Black folks. And again, like I think it was either Sharon or Rose said, when a cop sees me, they're not concerned with my nationality or my accent or, my socioeconomic background. They just see one thing, they see my skin color, and that automatically makes me more susceptible to contact with police and possibly ending up incarcerated to then have that contact with ICE and be at risk of deportation. So, Black immigrants are much more susceptible to that than, non-Black immigrants. And then obviously, they're dealing with additional issues that even Black Americans aren't facing, in that we have citizenship for what, little that's worth sometimes, but, at least we're not dealing with, this double-edged sword of, walking the tightrope of, dealing with anti-Blackness and living in a country that was, rooted and founded on white supremacy. And then also a country that has always been very racist in how it's looked at non-white immigration to the country. So yeah, so that's what I would say there.
Yeah, if I may, sorry, excuse me if I'm jumping in before anyone else. I don't mean to cut anyone off. But I think I also wanted to add in terms of this historical thread and how this 94 bill leads to the 96 bill. But even before 94, we're talking about a country with a history of Jim Crow. We're talking about a country with the history of slavery, and all those things at different moments have impacted Black people negatively. And the 94 crime bill is an extension of those legacies, right? And so when we get to 96, it's just an extension of what they've continually done to the Black body, and which is to incarcerate it, which is in immigration terms to deport it, to not provide it with justice, dignity, compassion. And so the 94 bills was an extension and a continuation of the enduring legacies of slavery and the Jim Crow laws. And so when you think of it in that sense, I think, it's very important. I wanted to share these stats from, a report we did at Baji too, is that 76% of the Black immigrants are deported because of contact with the police. So that increase of police in our communities, that's how we see it with facing Black migrants. And that's how we already know what it does to, Black Americans, but that's where it comes in with Black immigrants. We have the fact that Black immigrants make up only 5.4% of the undocumented population in the US, but make up 20.3% of the immigrants facing removal based on criminal convictions. And so again, it's that increase in numbers that is targeted to Black people. And so the same way that we see the 94 bill target, Black communities, Black Americans, it opened a door for that to extend to immigrants. But as someone mentioned in the chat, Nana Jafi, my executive director and my boss, so I will take that as well. It's just that she also shared is the fact that even before this, right? We saw the impact of 94 impacting Black immigrants even then. The fact that folks with green cards weren't receiving the defense that a green card is supposed to provide them. So all in all, I think it's just very important that it's the 94, the 96 crime bill, the immigration bill is an extension of the legacy of slavery, of the Jim Crow laws, in the same way that they try to trap black liberation and shut it down. That's what those policies are continuing to do, or those legislations are continuing to do to Black people and Black immigrants.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to turn to you, Rose, to talk about what are some of the local and state level interventions as we have this context now of how Black people are being criminalized. What are some of those state and local interventions that you've been involved with, or that should be on our radars as we think about how do we respond to this? What should our response be? And you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, first of all, I think we have to be educated when it comes to living in this country. Like, how can immigrants or people in general interact with police? The system is not in our favor. And when people are being stopped in their cars or are incarcerated, the majority, they don't understand. There's a language barrier, there's fear, confusion. They don't understand what is going on. So I think we need to educate people, first of all, like, okay, when you get caught with the police or when you're in trouble, those are the steps that you do. Those are the strategies that you take. You don't just sign any documents. There's certain things you don't do. For instance, people who are incarcerated, they go in, first of all, they don't know what happened to them. They're just in there. They keep asking, like, what have I done? Like, they don't know. No one is there to explain to them. Plus, a lot of pro bono lawyers, they're just there. They don't even go to court to fight for these people or to present them well. They are just there to help them. And another way of like, we're just going to help you. You're going to be here for a certain amount of time, for instance, like 3 months, 2 months. You just have to sign this document. What is that document? There's no explanation. Interpreters are not provided for them in that time. And they will just sign those documents without knowing, like, what is the consequence of me signing these documents? I may stay in prison for 2 months or 3 or 4, but then it's going to be felony or in my future. So they basically just go with the plea bargain, like, oh, sign, you're going to be here for 3 months, 2 months, afterwards, you're off. But once they're released, 2 months later, you see ICE coming knocking their doors, because now the ICE and the police, apparently they're working together. Once an immigrant is caught, is in prison, first thing they check, I think the ICE and they'll just see like your status. If you have green card, or if you're a citizen, if you have green card, then they'll follow you. As I'm talking to you right now, we have a gentleman that was incarcerated like a month ago, and he's in detention center right now, facing deportation. And there's no lawyer to represent him, nothing. Apparently, I received a call a couple of days ago at night that they need help. I asked him, what did you do? He's like, I have no idea. He's like, they just told me to sign this document. After I signed, they told me I'll be in for 2 months and then I'll go home. He said, I'm afraid I don't have a language, and when I have to go to work because I don't want to be evicted. So there's fear of losing your house. You have children at home, economical crisis, because they're living under threat. The threat of being in prison without knowing when you get out, what is next, you know? So we're working together to educate. That's the first step, to educate our people, the system in this country. Like, how do you navigate the system? When you have issues with the police, who do you contact? Ask for a lawyer. What documents do you have to sign? And under what circumstances do you have to sign it? If you have language issues, then you have to ask for interpreter. We provide it for you. So the pro bono lawyer could not just go in without contacting immigrant rights organizers or connect with community organizers to help those who are in need, you know? So those are the things that we're trying to do, like work with local leaders, local officials, to make sure that immigrants are being treated right when they're in prison or they're in jail, or if they need help, they have to reach out, and just instead of just them being left out, not knowing what is going to be done. So in a local level, we try to create a coalition of immigrant rights organizers, faith leaders, community leaders, and immigration lawyers to work together on how can we help these people? How can we educate them so that at least when they go in, they know exactly what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sharon, what about you in Louisiana? You talked a little bit about earlier about some of the challenges and some of the work that's taking place. What are some of the steps that you're taking, your organization is taking at the local level and the state level to address the criminalization that we're talking about, and to push back against it, or to address it?
Thank you so much, Mara. Just like my colleague Rose said, we are almost similar things. First of all, we are also partnering with local organizations as well as local partners to actually advocate and fight anti-Blackness. That is where we start from. We have to fight the anti-Blackness. And also, we have to also be able to coordinate our community, work with the faith-based organization to also advocate for the sheriffs to cancel this 287G, because it's affecting the immigrant community. Our people need fair representation, and we actually need fair policies and welcoming resolution for immigrants. We have been fighting for a welcoming city, welcoming state, because it's one thing to say there is inclusion, equity, but we don't actually see it in action. So that is something we've been advocating with our elected officials, and we have been actually advocating to see that this actually inclusion and equity can be brought into the immigrant community. Rose talked about fair legal representation. It's one thing for us to have leaders in the forefront, but also we also need federal government to pay for those lawyers. Because when you talk about legal representation and we don't have proper fee to pay for those people, then they will remain in jail. So we are trying to not just look for lawyers, we actually are in the forefront to end some of these policies and to see how some of these policies can be eradicated. One, by educating our community to stand up and also be able to advocate for themselves, and also to teach them about know your right. It's very important that we have our immigrant community know your right. So we have month-to-month, one community dialogue, as we call it down here, where we have legal representative, lawyers, and other leaders who can educate our community on what the immigrant community should be aware of. Issues on if ICE knock at your door, what should you do? Know your right, those specificities, we get to train our communities. Rose also mentioned about language barriers. We actually have taken a step to also step in and educate our communities on English as a second language. What does English do? It's a tool, because if you can't communicate in America, then you have an issue. So we are taking that step to also educate our community, teach them English, and try to see how we can have an inclusive community who can actually advocate for themselves, even when we can't get their call immediately. They can speak up for themselves before we get to intervene. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those perspectives, especially at the local and the state level. And just a point that came to mind, and then I'll get to your hand, Rose, is the notion of welcoming cities or sanctuary cities. And there's always this question, at least in my mind, when it comes to Black people, is if you have a city that doesn't treat its current Black residents well, that doesn't invest in its current Black neighborhoods, who is it welcoming to? How can we ever state that it will be welcoming or a sanctuary for Black immigrants or Black migrants who will also be in that city? And so this notion of cities actually investing in Black communities, in making sure that there is equitable access to resources for Black communities, just as a baseline, that's how you can ensure that it will be welcoming to anyone coming in. But we can't, you know, as Black migrants, we don't want them coming into cities where they will be mistreated because the city doesn't value Black lives already. And that's something that we all have to contend with. Rose, I'll go to you and then we'll pivot.
Yeah, just adding to what my colleague Sharon is saying. Yeah, it's very important that we're doing the Know Your Rights event. And right now we're planning to invite lawyers to meet with the communities to teach them, you know, like these are your rights, you know, and those are the documents that you should sign or you shouldn't sign. And also with the police, like how can police interact with the community and how can the community interact with the police? On the top of it, we are pushing our communities to become citizens. So we provide citizen classes because once they are citizens, their treatment shift a little bit, especially when it comes to ICE. So that kind of creates a little bit of safety. And instead of just being a green card holder, if you have a passport, the treatment a bit changes. So that is also works for their own safety. And that's something that we always encourage our community to do so.
Excellent. And I will ask if you're able to drop your information into the chat also for folks who may want to follow up with either supporting some of your efforts, supporting some of the work that's happening, or just to learn more information. That will be great for our audience. Just one point before we turn to some of the federal and sort of national level interventions that I think is really important for us to have in the back of our minds is we are talking about the criminalization of Blackness and Black people in the US context, but we know that this is a global phenomenon. There are serious issues, crisis, border violence around the world that is connected to this anti-Blackness that exists everywhere in the world. So if we go to the Mediterranean, if we go to the borders in North Africa, as people are seeking to get to Europe, when we go to Central and South America, you will see similarities in terms of the anti-Blackness. So this is not a US specific phenomenon. In many countries also, there is, we go to Colombia, Brazil, you see this anti-Blackness very, very boldly, actually. And in some of those cases, that's the push that's pushing people to migrate to the southern border in the US. But if you go to, or if you pay attention to the conversations that are happening in Europe, the conversations that are happening in North Africa, the conversations that are happening even some places in the Middle East, you will see that migration policy is a significant issue to the point where they now have these agreements, for example, in the UK, where they are essentially deporting migrants wherever they're from to Rwanda. They're sending them to Rwanda and basically paying to have these individuals sent to Rwanda as part of their migration policy, right? So it's important for us to have sort of an expansive view so that we can situate what's happening in the US against this broader global phenomenon as it relates to Black people who are migrating, and to consider the push factors for that migration are tied to imperialism, tied to colonialism, tied to the ongoing exploitation of the Black world, the ongoing extraction of resources, the ongoing interference and meddling to create crisis that is what's driving people out of their homes. And so these are the kinds of things that I think give additional context so that we can clearly see who our targets are from an advocacy and an organizing standpoint. So I wanted to just add that context as we look at how we are trying to address this issue at the federal level and the national level in the US context. And so I want to turn to Ronald and Tamantha just to talk about some of the interventions that are being developed and some of the work that's being developed on that front.
Go ahead, Ronald.
No, go ahead, please.
I'm just going to add a few things. I think at the federal level, like I mentioned earlier, around the immigration and asylum system itself, you know, being fundamentally broken, obviously more funding needs to go to making sure that we have more immigration judges to be able to hear these asylum cases. Right now, we have thousands of folks that have been waiting for years to even attempt to get asylum or get even work authorization, to be in the United States, that have been living here for years and have already made families here. So actually putting actual funding into those systems so that people can properly be moved through those systems in the way that it should be happening is really important. As far as temporary protections, I think it's really important for the Biden administration and Congress to be more intentional around being honest, around calling out anti-Blackness as it relates to temporary designations given to, non-Black countries, and, the asylum rates for, non-Black countries, how, people are kind of tiptoeing around that issue. But, when you look at the data, it's very clear that if you're a Black migrant, in all aspects of the immigration and asylum system, your chances of getting the best deal are pretty slim to none. And that deals with the structural racism that's at the core of the asylum and immigration system as a whole. So, there needs to be work done there to begin to root that out as well. And obviously the big one is trying to get an actual permanent pathway to citizenship for folks, where people are not constantly feeling like their lives are hanging in the balance every couple of years, depending on every, presidential administration, and whether they have the political will to actually do something on behalf of thousands of people that, are just here trying to make fulfilling lives like any other American families trying to do.
Yeah. And what many other reports that are out there have done is that I think it should show that this whole system is not organic. Jails and prisons were created by these policies to restrict Black freedom, and that it is extended to also Black immigrants. And so I think first and foremost, I think what we're asking for on the federal level is that we don't need this, and it doesn't support anything, and all it does is restrict our freedom. So I think we're pushing for the abolishment of ICE detention centers, prisons, and jails, because they don't serve us. I think also when we're thinking of just funding, we are also seeing on a variety of different scales, migrants need different resources. We need housing, we need language access, and we have to fund and require our government spend the money to support folks in those spaces. I can't tell you how many times so much of our work is, we work to get someone out of detention, which is very important, and that is the first step. But then the second step is they're looking at us, they don't have a place to go. So we need housing. We need those all around basic necessities, basic human rights for immigrant folks, for Black people, period. And so I think that is another thing that we have to start getting more into when we're thinking of how do we target the federal government, those appropriation requests. We have to be intentional about the fact that it has to expand to our whole community. And that brings us to my next point too, is that when there are policies that are being talked about that are supposed to, bring justice or, provide temporary protections, etc., but they're often attached now with criminal bars, and so to speak, additional barriers that are specific to Black people that will keep them from even benefiting from the slight solution to their problem that they're experiencing. And so I think again we have to be intentional about no more additional criminal bars, and we have to get rid of the bars that are currently there, because what we know is that it disproportionately impacts Black people, Black migrants. So I think when we're looking at, the final thing in terms of, the federal government is just, Biden took office and he had a racial equity order and didn't mention immigration at all in it. And again, we can't allow that to happen. We have to continue hard that there is no racial equity if certain Black groups are being left out. You can't pick and choose. There's racial equity across the board, and I think that's what we're trying to get at too. So and that's some of the things that I would like to touch upon in terms of federal government solutions. Again, this abolishment of prison jails, they don't need to exist. They don't need to. We have enough evidence. We have enough reports like this that show why they even exist in the first place. And then secondly, I think it's again important for us to really be clear about the fact that racial equity should extend to Black immigrants, Black people in all the work we're doing, or all the different sectors, excuse me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I think everything that you've just shared, that you've all shared, is why this report, Criminalizing Blackness, was so important, why we really worked to get it out, and why it will be forthcoming and hopefully shared broadly in all of these networks. I think there's still so much learning that has to happen, and our responsibility to educate the general public. I wish we had so much more time to really delve into this topic, but I wanted to just give an opportunity for each of you to share how people can get involved. We've heard a lot about some of the work, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities from an advocacy standpoint. And I'm sure people have questions about how they can get involved. How can they as individuals get involved, and how can they get plugged in to what each of you are doing in your own networks? So I'll go around starting with Rose, just to kind of share what are the ways that people can get plugged in with your work.
Thank you. Yeah, it is very important for people to get connected, especially in their communities, because people tend to trust people that look like them, right? People that sound like them, or people that feel their pain. You know, for instance, if we're immigrants, we're talking to another immigrant, they can listen to us. So it's easy to connect via churches, mosque, community gathering places. So when you go in, you talk about immigration issues, don't shy away from it. And do not hesitate to ask questions, because so many people are there, they are afraid. They cannot speak out. But if you meet their need in the place of their need matters. You know, just like how are you? How's everything going? How's the school? How's work? What is your need right now? What do you think you need right now? So that will open the door for conversations. And then once you get to know who they are, what they need, then maybe you can advocate, you know, by maybe volunteer for an organization, or write to an elected official, or do something, you know, regarding the policy changes. Just fight for the policies that you know that are going to help these people. Fight for the fair rights, you know, housing, work, schooling, anything that's going to work for them. So the more the number, the better. You know, the louder we are, it sounds better. So in order for you to get involved, just look up any organization wherever you are, and just like, okay, how can I advocate? You know, and just look for an organization or an organizer, or, you know, people that are working with people. Then you can be able to help out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, if you can drop your contact information, socials in the chat, so that folks can follow that way as well. Sharon.
Thank you. I will add to what my colleagues said, and I will say support our campaign. You know, love conquers it all. It starts from each and every one of us. If we all can show love, then I believe that our society will be a better place. So we can all start by supporting. I believe that there is no single person that doesn't know an immigrant. Whether you are non-immigrant, whether you're white, whether you're Caucasian, you know someone who is an immigrant. So start by supporting them. Support their campaign, support our campaign, subscribe to our newsletter, and join immigrant organization to actually be a welcomer. Also, be involved in the inclusion process. Be a welcomer to immigrants in your state and cities, and also donate to support the work that organizations like us are doing. That goes a long way for us to continue representing our communities and keep doing what we do. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Ronald.
I think first I would be remiss if I didn't say for folks to, you know, visit baji.org, where we have different campaigns, different statements surrounding a lot of different issues that are impacting the Black diaspora as a whole. But I think in particular, getting at that intersection where we can stand in the gap, or how we can support, is understanding that our liberation only happens if we care as much as we do for fighting against Title 42 as we do for voting rights, because that's what it's going to take. You know, our liberations and destinies are tied, you know, not to be cheesy, but it really is true. And so I think it's just understanding that it's like, yes, Title 42 needs to end, but also, you know, we have an election on January 6th. And what I think what is going to be the difference is we got to meet Black people where they are. It's not just vote, your life depends on it. because Democrats haven't always shown up for us. But, you know, it could be, hey, this is what you need to know. Maybe it's about sharing that in your community, sharing that information. And we've been doing a civic engagement webinar these last few months, trying to get that conversation going and started. So what you can do as individuals is join us in our campaigns, in our webinars, in our different actions, because that's how we can do this work together and show up at the intersections of our diaspora, because we're wide and far. And then finally, I think the easiest thing is to share this report when it comes out, to read it first, share it, and, you know, spread the information, because there's a lot of good information in there about how this is a continuation of disparate treatment on Black people, Black bodies, and how, you know, it has only been extended to the Black immigrants, but it didn't start and will end with just Black immigrants as well.
Excellent. Samantha.
Yeah, that's hard to follow. Thanks, Ron. That was lovely. Love that. I mean, I think, first of all, supporting, you know, Black-led, immigrant-led grassroots organizations, mutual aid organizations in your city is really important. If you don't happen to have those, obviously following organizations like Undocumented Black Network would be great. Baji, the lovely ladies here with a Louisiana organization for refugees and immigrants. There's a lot of great organizations, Haitian Bridge Alliance, African Communities Together, you know, following our work, our campaign, seeing where you can plug in your skill sets to uplifting your voice on behalf of Black immigrant communities is really important. And yeah, reading this report and just training yourself up on these intersections and these issues. So when you're having these conversations with lawmakers and whatnot, you're able to bring knowledge to them that they might not even have themselves, and help them understand the nuances of Black oppression and how it operates in the United States, and how those intersections really look, and the urgency that's needed on behalf of Black immigrant communities and Black communities in general, and the fact that for centuries, you know, we've had the short end of the stick in this country, and we're continuing to be over-policed and underserved and marginalized in all societal aspects of this in the United States. So, you know, it's just really important to educate yourselves and get involved with folks that are directly impacted doing the work, and providing skill sets and resources and funds to help them continue their work, for sure.
Absolutely. I am just so grateful. And I know we are all just really thankful for all of the expertise and brilliance that you've all shared. I encourage those who have been able to view this webinar to follow up on the contact information that was shared, follow up on the organizations, information that's shared, the campaigns, the advocacy efforts. We certainly will be continuing this work moving forward. So we wanted to have this session as the introduction to the report that will be shared broadly, but the work, it continues far after the report is issued. And so we want to encourage you and invite you into these spaces and invite you to go along with us. I think one of just the kind of final thoughts to leave with this group and with everyone who's participated is the fact that we need each other, that we have to recognize the common enemy, if you will, that affects Black people around the world. And so sometimes this notion of the messaging that even Black immigrants, when they come to the US, there's a certain conditioning and messaging that you may have based upon how Black people in the US are portrayed in the media. And likewise, there's a certain kind of messaging that Black Americans receive about Black people when they're coming from different countries in the US. We have to understand that all of that is done to keep us separate, to keep us divided, and to keep us at odds with each other, which is a distraction from really paying attention to and targeting our energies toward the system of oppression that is global, that targets Black people wherever we find ourselves. And so going forward in this work with that in mind, I think allows us to overcome those forces that are seeking to divide us. And it allows us to strengthen and amplify our power, not just where we are locally, but connecting with our people everywhere we find ourselves. That is important. That is critical to our liberation. We can't just be liberated in the US. If we're not, if we're not talking about liberation in Central America, South America, Asia, Europe, of our Black people, we're not going to have liberation anywhere. So I wanted to leave that with you, and hopefully we are galvanized to continue this work and to follow up with each of you, and to continued efforts to amplify the findings in this report and our ongoing advocacy efforts. So on behalf of the Movement for Black Lives, I want to thank all of our panelists. You all are brilliant. It's been such a pleasure working with each and every one of you. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing the fight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.